Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, the show that is part of the Simply Luxurious Life online destination, cultivating true contentment, the art of living a life of quality over quantity. Visit the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life, at our simplified URL, TSLL.co or thesimplyluxuriouslife.com to find the show notes for each podcast episode, as well as much more weekly content to elevate your everyday and deepen your contentment. From a Monday motivational post, recipes, videos of the cooking show series, style and decor inspiration, French and British inspired content, and readers' favorite regular weekly post, This and That, which is posted each Friday morning. Now to today's episode. Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 326th episode of The Simple Sophisticate. Today we're going to talk about finding and enjoying bliss, a natural state of true contentment. And we'll talk about how to find it. And it really is actually something I think will relieve you because it's something quite simple. It's just something we need to be consciously aware of. As well, this week's petite plaisir is actually quite a grand plaisir as someone who is enjoying this new series. And I'm going to break it down and share why I enjoy it, why I think it's worth watching, and why you might enjoy it as well. But that comes at the end of today's episode, and we need to talk about bliss. But before we get into today's topic, we haven't talked for 2 weeks. Since the last episode, I wanted to share some exciting news, and I also want to let you know that the audiobook is just about ready for you to purchase. It was submitted last week. There was one small error I was able to fix. It's been resubmitted, and it should be ready through Audible by the middle of April, if not sooner. And I will be posting when it becomes available on this podcast's Instagram account, The Simple Sophisticate podcast. So follow along on there and you'll be notified as soon as that book is available. There's just under 20 hours of listening material, 19 hours and 34 minutes, if I'm remembering correctly. And anyway, I know that as a podcast listener, that might be the format you want to tune into the book, and it is almost available. With that also said, speaking of the book, since we last spoke, the book, The Road to Le Papillon, Daily Meditations on True Contentment, became a bestseller in France travel. When the ebook became available on March 22nd, readers' interest in the book took it to number one, not only in the new release category, but also in the overall category of France travel, becoming a number one bestseller. Now you may be wondering, what is in the France travel section? So think Rick Steves, think Peter Mayle, think any of those travel books that you pick up about France. This book includes mentions of France travel, my trips to France. An entire chapter is about my trips to France, plus detailed glimpses in June and August and sprinkled throughout the entire book. It is a love of France that played a significant portion in my road to true contentment. And so I want to thank you, the listener, if you have purchased the book in any of the formats. Thank you so much. And I have news about traveling to France, and I'll talk about that at the end of today's episode, so stay tuned. But let's get into today's episode. A life of abundant bliss, a natural state of true contentment. Quote, "To attain wealth, the lasting kind, the kind that gives your life meaning, value, and sustenance, base your daily existence on the generosity of spirit. Everything else you desire will follow of its own accord. Deepak Chopra, Abundance, the Inner Path to Wealth. To experience great joy in our everydays is to experience bliss. If ever you find yourself smiling in the middle of your everydays just because, if you are me anyway, you are experiencing a bliss-filled moment. We may find it surprising or difficult at first to imagine the possibility to experience such a natural state, going about a life routine that happens nearly every day. But that is exactly the point to living consciously. This is exactly why choosing to understand what true contentment is makes all the difference. The culture that surrounds us often extols that everyday living must be grueling and busy, stress-filled, chaotic, loud, full of drama and gamesmanship and constant competition and comparison. And that the only way to escape such a real life, and I put that in air quotes around real, is to choose unnatural means or substances outside of our body or go to extremes in our celebrations and playtime, free time, weekends to bring us calm or bliss. Now, don't get me wrong. I enjoy a glass of wine with my meals, and I enjoy traveling to see and be immersed in cultures that capture my fascination. But I have never been one to need anything beyond consciously and intentionally living a life of true contentment to feel true bliss in my everydays. Because when you experience what true bliss is, when you have created a life you love living every day and have let go of trying to please the culture, letting go of holding on and refraining from controlling things and people and their actions that can never be in our control, that is when you open your life to the potential to feel an abundance of bliss. Deepak Chopra, in his new book, Abundance, the Inner Path to Wealth, speaks to what many other authors that have been discussed here on this podcast and on the blog and in the Simply Luxurious Life books, specifically the most recent book and more than a few entries and introductions about finding peace within ourselves and thus living a most fulfilling life. This term called dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. From Jay Shetty to Martha Beck to David Whyte and so many others, Chopra as well speaks to the gift we give our lives when we find the purpose/focus that marries what, number one, contributes positively to the world. And I want to reinforce that this is something that we are giving the world and what it needs, not what we think it needs or forcing our idea upon society. So we marry that, what we contribute to the world positively, with what we have a deep passion and unique ability to give the world. That is dharma. A quote from Deepak. Dharma is constantly showing the way forward. End quote. And you see, it takes time to know exactly what this is for each of us because it's going to be different for each of us. I can't sit here and tell you what it's going to be, and you can't tell anyone else what it can be, but we can at least say, here's the formula. And while others who have good intentions may notice and nudge us in a direction that leads us to discovering our dharma, maybe we have mentors, maybe we have teachers, maybe we have parents, friends that genuinely want what's best for us. And so they're observing our skills and our strengths that maybe we don't even recognize ourselves. That helps. That absolutely helps. But only we can discover what our dharma is with certainty. And in order to be certain, we must be present and live, as Chopra describes it, in simple awareness. Let's talk about what simple awareness is, because throughout his entire book, and I know some of you have picked it up already and started to read it, this is a book that's going to require you to take it bite by bite. You don't want to sit down and devour. Well, I shouldn't say that. Everyone's different. I had to take this book bite by bite. I slowly read through each chapter and annotated it quite significantly. And there are sections that I had to go back and reread once I had gained more context that was shared later in the book. And one theme that he really wants to make sure you understand is what simple awareness is. And so he consistently talks about that throughout the duration of the book. And so each time he would talk about it and put it in context with another idea that he shared, the more it made sense. So let's talk about it. He shares that simple awareness is the, quote, most powerful engine for change, end quote. Your simple awareness already exists within you and always has. But often we live the purported life outlined that we talked about earlier in this episode, by a bustling and harried culture. And this is errantly seen as the only way to really live and find supposed bliss, being in constant pursuit of something more and supposed happiness. And in so doing, we drown out what our simple awareness is trying to show us, trying to teach us about where to find our dharma. Quote, "You can glimpse simple awareness after finishing a great dinner or when appreciating a great work of art, while listening to Bach or listening to your child at play." End quote. Simple awareness is the space between the thoughts, a gap, and it is through meditation that we strengthen our ability to go deeper. What we mean by these gaps is not that you're not thinking, it's that you're stepping away from your thoughts and you're becoming an objective observer of what your mind is doing. So then therefore you are putting yourself in the driver's seat of your thoughts. You are not letting your mind control where you're going. In other words, you're becoming more mindful, more present, therefore more aware, and thus simple awareness. Quote, "The mind naturally seeks its source. It will connect to your soul or true self, whatever you want to call it, if given an opening. Your mind doesn't have to be coaxed to go there, much less forced." So it's a gravity that we keep denying our being by rushing through, by never stopping, by jamming our brain with past thoughts, future worries. All these things are not living a life of simple awareness. And when we give our mind space to be fully present, to be fully aware, then it can find its sweet spot. Then it can find its happy place, I guess you could say. Reading Chopra's words was encouraging and validating to me. So much of what I've experienced in my own life journey is echoed in what he speaks to be true about the abundance of life that you open up to when you find your dharma. So often, because we let society tell us what we need, should be doing, should be pursuing, we stand in the way of the true knowledge that sits within us and always will and always has. Our life's purpose is to shed the societal guidance and go within. That is where our truth and where the book of our true selves resides. And it will change our lives in all the more wonderful ways. We don't know what it is, but we'll know when we find it. That seems impossible, but it's paradoxically true. And that's why it's frightening to do, because you don't know what you'll find, but what you do find, no matter what it is, specifically, conceptually, it is natural bliss. Once we go within, we understand, but most importantly, we experience a deep inner peace. And then when we bring that knowledge to the world, we begin to figure out, much like finding the home for our puzzle piece, and we being the puzzle piece, where we can contribute. We then begin to ask, what does the world need that I can help fulfill? Even though it may not be screaming for it, because if it knew what it needed to, be healed or, to be helped, it would tend to it. It wouldn't need us. And that's why we need to hold ourselves in simple awareness, coming with the knowledge of what we can uniquely give, and being patient enough to understand what it is the world needs. And I want to again reiterate, it is imperative that we check ourselves and our intent of giving. Are we trying to control the world? Because if we are, then it is not our dharma, because a dharma would never imprison or limit the paths for others to find their own dharma and live on their own path, which will set them free. If our pursuit is only for self-gain, consciously or unconsciously, we have not found our dharma. Living our dharma, we find it far easier to let go of outcomes and live in the present. What to the outside world may seem confusing by how we're living or going about our lives or the decisions we're making, whatever it is, They may label it as wrong. Is these judgments are coming from those who are not living their dharma, because when you find the marriage of what you can give with joy and what the world needs, your peace creates an abundance of bliss in your everydays. And you no more want to control others than you want to control the weather. And I use that as a comparison because someone who is at peace with what they cannot control acknowledges they cannot control the weather, so complaining doesn't get you anywhere. And instead you shift and you find something to savor in every single weather pattern. Rain brings growth. Wind blows out the old and brings a new beauty. Snow gives us time to be still. In other words, you create rituals to celebrate what you cannot control and what will always have beauty if you will look for it, as Mother Nature is always trying to strengthen our awareness. You savor what is, you trust yourself more completely than you have ever thought possible, considering you cannot foresee the future, and your old self would be gobsmacked by how settled and contented you are, holding yourself in the present with no promise as to what tomorrow will bring. This may all sound a bit, for lack of a better term, woohooey, or more than just a little illogical. But let me ask you this. Are you able to be still, physically and mentally, in your life regularly without feeling pulled or anxious that you aren't doing something? I actually put that question in bold on the show notes because I really want people to be honest with themselves. I intentionally use the word regularly in this statement or this question because when you live your dharma, you will feel regularly a deep resting state of contentment. And tomorrow won't matter, yesterday won't bug you, and you will be at peace. This is an everyday way of being, no matter what is going on in the world, and it is possible. So if you haven't experienced this, yep, you may think what I am sharing in this episode is a bit out there and unrealistic, but in fact, it is possible, and it is amazing. And it has brought a peace to my days that I for so long only wished for and sometimes thought might be impossible. I too stood on the other side and said, how is this possible? Because I refused to believe that it was impossible. Even in those moments of doubt, yes, you always have the dark days, right? Where you think, no, it just can't happen. It's not possible. I know it's going to be better, but I just don't see how. But then the better part of me said, Shannon, come on, you can figure this out. And I've been trying to figure it out for over 20 years. And a lot of what I learned is what I share in my new book, The Road to Le Papillon, Daily Meditations on True Contentment. What I learned is that you'll gain a glimpse or a taste of abundant bliss, and it'll all start to unfold, and it'll be gradual, but you'll start to realize, okay, this is something that I can give to the world that it needs, and I love doing it. Not just you're good at it, but it does come more easily to you in the sense that you lose all track of time. And it wasn't what the overarching society understood in my case. It didn't align with the right way to live for a woman in a patriarchal America. But once I found the courage to honor what I found within, there was no other choice. As I share in the conclusion of my book, the question is, will you respond? It's a quote or question written by poet David Whyte. And I share the full poem, the full context of that poem is in the conclusion. But the question isn't, is this the right thing? You'll know it's the right thing to do. The question is, will you have the courage to act on it? And that will make all the difference. There will be a time of limbo because this will take time for you to first discover what it is, then figure out what it is. Because it's going to take some time for you to make sense of what you're learning and understanding about yourself. Because even you may not be able to fully explain it. You just know it in your bones that this is what you can give. But you also know, no matter what people say, no matter what the questions are, what the doubters say, you become radiant and you light up whenever you are engaged in it or talking about it. And those who sincerely want you to be happy, they'll see it. They won't understand it always, but they'll see it. And if they love you, It may take time, but they're going to try to figure it out because they want you to be happy. And they see your joy. They see you lighting up from within. Keep trusting this guidance. There will be pushback, as I mentioned. We've talked about this many times on the podcast, on the blog. But the pushback only works if you're not truly rooted. And if this is indeed your dharma, it cannot be uprooted because it is who you are. It is part of you and always will be. A life of abundant bliss most likely won't receive great acclaim or great applause. In other words, the society won't see your bliss or recognize it as bliss because the society's definition, the one we mentioned at the top of this episode, is not the same thing as what true bliss actually is. But again, if you have found your dharma, you will pay no mind to what society says, and you will simply be overjoyed you have found what brings you to life fully. I have linked Deepak Chopra's new book, Abundance, The Inner Path to Wealth, which inspired this episode, in the show notes. It just was released late winter, so back in, I believe it was February 2022. And there's so much more to take in. He has very specific examples, too, of how you know if you're living in your dharma. And if you're doing certain things, you are, and if you're doing certain things, you're not. He delineates that very clearly. If you are someone who practices yoga, you will especially find this book of interest. I myself practice yoga, but this book helped me understand more fully the benefit of yoga. And you don't have to practice yoga to read this book. But if you do, again, he speaks of yoga in the capital sense, not the physical sense. Capital Y is what I mean, capital Y in yoga. And the marrying of the inner world and the outer world, meaning your inner world and the outer world being societies. And he talks about how yoga is marrying, or yoking, as he says, yoking those two together. And meditation helps you do that. As we talked about, it helps you find that simple awareness and hold yourself in it. And it also then opens up the ability for you to figure out what your dharma is, so you can bring it and share it with the world. I have included as well 3 other posts and podcast episodes that you might be interested in that are on this topic. I talk about being grounded, which was a blog post written a couple weeks ago, inspired again by this book. I also share 15 books to read for a better, happier, contented you in 2022. And share 5 strategies how to help yourself out, which was shared about 2 years ago, I believe. All right. We still have a petite plaisir for foodies, francophiles, great television writing, so many reasons you're going to want to tune in to find out what this petite plaisir is. But first, I have a sponsor I'd like to introduce you to. I'll be right back. As someone who, while enjoys looking my best, doesn't want to spend oodles amounts of time shopping for what I want and at the price I want, karma is the perfect solution when I find what I want online. If it's not available at the price I want or the size I want, or if it's not even in stock at all, I use karma. And when that item goes on sale or the price is reduced to the setting I have set in the system, it emails me and lets me know that it's available to shop. Karma is a Chrome extension, an app that you can use to save products from thousands of stores. Outnet, Theory, Ralph Lauren, nearly all of the brands that are shared on the Simply Luxurious Life blog and on this podcast are brands that Karma works with. They organize what you want into lists, and you get real-time updates like price drop and back in stock notifications. When you're ready to buy, it automatically scans the web for coupons and applies the best one at checkout while giving you cashback rewards. How awesome is that? Download Karma for free today through my link for a chance to win $1,000. Go to shop.karmanow.com/TSLL. That's shop.karmanow.com/TSLL. And you'll find the link in today's show notes. So speaking of someone finding their dharma and sharing what they love with the world, is Julia Child. This week's Petit Plaisir is Julia, the HBO Max series, which just started to air last Thursday, March 31st. Many critics debated whether yet another focus on Julia Child was necessary when HBO Max gave the green light to their new series starring British talent Sarah Lancashire. After all, there was the most recent documentary of the same name, a PBS miniseries airing last year on Julia as a TV cook with commentary from contemporaries sharing how she influenced them. And of course, Nora Ephron's film, Julie and Julia, starring Meryl Streep as Child, just to name a few of the most recent and well-known. However, notably, not one of the aforementioned films or videos have focused on her journey through name recognition to national fame, nor have any of the aforementioned productions included a true, real look into her personal life. Thankfully, there are many well-researched biographies that do just this, and as I had hoped the documentary, Julia, would include much depth shared in the long list of biographies, it did not, as it seemed to have been hampered by the limitations of the pandemic, as well as focused on one message that, while insightful, was lacking in the actual journey Child herself had to navigate, beginning from the expectations of an ardent and unwavering conservative father to the American culture itself during the mid-20th century. Thankfully, HBO Max, as well, thought a more extensive portrayal of Julia Child's life worth sharing with the world. After all, Julia Child shared much of her life journey throughout her entire life in letters exchanged, for example, with Avis. Be sure to read, as always, Julia, the letters of Julia Child and Avis Devoto. Devoto is played by Bebe Neuwirth in this new series and does a fantastic job. Also check out Julia's own detailed memoir, which came out in 2006, My Life in France. Interviews, oodles of them. Read Julia Child, The Last Interview and Other Conversations. And in her other many books and cookbooks, I've included the entire list of the books I've read alone and recommend in today's show notes, and I'll go over those as we get to the end of this conversation. While there is some filling in of the blanks, as the show's creator Daniel Goldfarb admits, there was far more fact to work with and bring to the screen that has not been known to viewers before if they only watched Julie and Julia or the documentary Julia. For example, Russ Morash, and if you've seen the first 3 episodes, you know who this guy is. He's the producer tasked with The French Chef, the cooking show, on the Boston Public Broadcasting Station. He's actually praised by Julia and in biographies, and there has not been one mention ever written that he was against the show being produced, which is played up quite strongly in the series. However, the idea of what public television was supposed to be at this time, as it was a new medium, was still wrestling with what it could be. And The French Chef challenged who the audience of public television would be. This theme is focused on heavily and necessarily, as Child was the catalyst that did change public television in a dramatic and significant way. Having had the opportunity to speak in person with 4 people who knew Julia intimately, expats living in France, Patricia Wells and her husband Walter, as well as Susan Herman Loomis, one of her children's godmother is Julia Child's sister Dorothy, as well as the founder of La Varenne Cooking School in Paris, Anne Willan. The last 2, Susan and Anne, have both appeared on this podcast. All of these individuals have shared stories and experiences of Julia, spending time with her, that speak highly of her, but also specifically the Wells speak to Julia and Paul's relationship and Julia's devotion to Paul, because they knew Julia. What she would do is she would stop and have dinner with the Wells in the Wells' house in Provence on her way down to their house in Provence. They only knew Julia and Paul after Paul's health had been abruptly changed due to a botched surgery in the early 1970s that forever changed his life. So they never really saw Paul as we are getting to know him in these most recent films and series. But all they could speak about was Julia's devotion to Paul, about how she cared for him and continued to travel with him for quite some time to Provence. And all of them spoke of Julia's love for food and France. Many a book speaks of Paul and Julia's affection for one another. And while Ephron's Julie and Julia plays this up quite grandly and to the audience's delight, I think it is important, and I'm grateful HBO tends to this, to show both Julia and Paul as real people and not the romanticized versions. That Paul Child was distrustful and disinterested in the new fad that was television is not a surprise. He was an intellectual, a polyglot, curious about the world, and a devoted, lifelong diplomat until his forced retirement far earlier than he had anticipated due to changes in the administration at the White House. And the mere fact that his wife entertains the idea of starring on a television show, a medium that is brand new, even if it is about cooking, something he wholeheartedly supported and encouraged, understandably poses a quandary for what is best for both Julia's career and the culture at large. As well, the determination and desire Julia shares to pursue the production of the series in its early stages, as well as her ability to finance it on her own, will not surprise readers who have read the biographies listed below in the show notes. Julia received a healthy inheritance from her mother, who passed away far too young and when Julia was in her 20s, and Julia deeply loved her. As well, Julia received what is called in the biographies an allowance from her father, who did remarry quite swiftly after his first wife died, well into her adult years, even after she'd been married to Paul for quite some time. And her father's relationship was strained due to their differing political and thereby how a lady should live or behave ideologies. She did love him and maintained a relationship with him, but it was strained. And if you read the letters between Julia and Avis, I loved that book, you will understand why there was a strain in their relationship, Julia and her father's. You probably noticed I am admittedly and unabashedly more than a bit of a Julia Child geek, nerd, superfan, whatever you want to call it, and this will come as no surprise to long-term readers of the blog. I am delighted that the series gives us Julia Child the person, as well as the persona glorified, for good reason, on television. But the truth is she was a real person, and this series, at least so far in the first 3 episodes, aims to show the person that became who we, as a country, fell in love with and are still in love with. Sarah Lancashire shared in an interview with Vanity Fair recently that having now starred as Julia Child in this series, someone she didn't entirely know much about before accepting the role is, quote, now at the stage where I will not have one word said against the woman, end quote. As well, in the same article, there is an anecdote Lancashire shares, having spoken to a man who gladly boasts he had the opportunity to drive Julia home after an event she was the featured guest at. And Lancashire asks, well, what did she say while you were driving her home? And he said, she didn't say anything. She just exhaled deeply, then sat quietly the entire journey home. And that is just it. Julia Child was a person. And while all the highs of her life are often the only thing that's focused upon, or if it is a low, it's often dramatized to fit a particular audience, focusing on the human side, the everyday joys, wonders, navigations, how she worked with this life, this opportunity that married with her passion is so helpful for viewers to see. I am most curious to know as the series unfolds. There are 8 episodes, a new one airing each Thursday. If the series, for example, will include her breast cancer, of which she survived but did have a unilateral mastectomy. Paul's letters to his brother about his fear he would lose her during this time reveal even more soundly his love and devotion to Julia. She too speaks about the mastectomy and navigating through this time, again, revealing her tenacity and determination to move forward, and she doesn't dwell, just will not dwell. If I could share one unnecessarily exaggerated aspect of the series thus far, it is Lancashire's portrayal of Julia, and this is by direction, as doubtful on the set of her own cooking show, The French Chef. Nowhere in all the biographies and even the memoir have I read that she was fearful on set. In fact, just the opposite. And I include a link to a post that shares a list of enumerated quotes from Julia on all sorts of things. Some will make you chuckle, some will make you laugh, and some will inspire you. Even her producer, Russ Marash, shared, quote, "She was curious, professional, and scholarly about her art. These are the 3 keys to Julia. She was never casual. She does not sit around and worry. She trusts professionals," end quote. Admittedly, after 10 seasons of The French Chef, each season, Julia no doubt became more confident in front of the camera lens. But she does seem to have a genuine love of being in front of the camera. And in the biographies, it is revealed she clamored to be on television throughout her entire life, well into her late 80s. Just watching the episodes of Baking with Julia, as well as Julia and Jacques cooking at home, shares her ease and playfulness in front of the camera. All of this is to say, after watching the first 3 episodes of Julia on HBO Max, I highly recommend watching. The cast and acting, Lancashire embodies Julia brilliantly, is sublime. The sets and food scenes, oh so delicious and welcoming. The shots of the child's home in Cambridge, the interior and exterior, are abundant with warmth and richness of savoring everyday good living and eating. And the depth and breadth of accuracy portrayed of a woman America adores, very much appreciated. I have included the trailer and I'll share it with you here in a second, but here are a list of the books written about or by Julia Child that I have read and recommend. All are linked on the show notes. The French Chef in America, Julia Child's second act, written by her nephew Alex Prudhomme in 2016. Deary, The Remarkable Life of Julia Child by Bob Spitz. In Julia's Kitchen, the practical and convivial kitchen design inspired by Julia Child by Pamela Hine and Jim Schreier, 2016. Julia Child Rules, Lessons on Savoring Life by Karen Carbo. As Always, Julia, The Letters of Julia Child and Avis Devoto, 2011. My Life in France by Julia Child, from 2006. Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volume 1, Julia Child, Simone Beck, and Louisette Berthold, 1961. Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volume 2, Julia Child and Simone Beck, 1970. The French Chef Cookbook, 1968, based on the black and white series of the PBS show The French Chef. The Way to Cook by Julia Child, 1989. And Baking with Julia, Savor the Joys of Baking with America's Best Bakers by Dory Greenspan, with introduction from Julia Child, based on the series of the same name on PBS, Baking with Julia. Here is the trailer for Julia on HBO Max.
The food itself is like a passport.
Let her in.
You look lovely this morning.
Not camera ready, as they say.
What are you going to talk about?
I guess the book. Before everyone forgets about it completely. At this stage of my life, I want to feel relevant.
My guest this afternoon writes cookbooks. Maybe we'll rename our little program What My Wife's Been Reading. Welcome, Julia Child.
What a lovely introduction. And I've come just in time.
Ooh. What is she doing? Are you all right down there?
You were a treasured guest in living rooms all over Boston.
To Julia.
To us. I've had a recurring thought that I'd like to propose to you. An educational cooking show hosted by myself.
Feels flimsy to me. This is public television, for God's sake.
Shouldn't we go with someone with a more camera-friendly look and a less distinctive sound?
You were onto something so big. I'm just sorry that my colleagues don't have the vision to see it yet.
Where are these gentlemen? One of the advantages of looking like me is that you learn at a young age how not to take no for an answer. I don't know if I can do all this.
Doing this is genius.
Action.
Out of the tree of life, I just picked me a plum.
Welcome to the French Chef.
The BBC's making docs about prize-winning scientists while we're peddling cookbooks.
Men.
If every critic could silence every artist, how dull would the world be then?
Now, butchering a chicken, nothing to be afraid of. The legs, the wings, the thighs, and the breast. I envision a confederacy of women, an estrogen safety net.
Well, I like the sound of that.
Wait till your charms are ripe for the...
Oh, you're not afraid of a little flame, are you?
Suppose I'll have to get used to sharing you. Everyone wants you.
You ain't left the ground.
My advice, enjoy the ride.
Wait till...
Why do you call it the French? You're not French.
Wait till I...
She mugs like she's Lucille Ball.
Be a lady.
I am a lady, Dad, just not your type. Let her in!
Best is yet to come the day you're mine.
I hope you've had as much fun as I did. Bon appetit.
The best is yet to come the day you're mine.
So the series is called Julia. It airs every Thursday night for a total of 8 episodes on HBO Max. I'll be tuning in, and I couldn't stop with just one episode as they aired 3 episodes on the first night, and needless to say, my Thursday night was all about Julia. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petite Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each episode, where I'll recommend a book, a film, a show, a recipe, anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. And be sure to find the show notes, the list of all those books, and the trailer at thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 326. Now, I mentioned as we began the episode to talk about a trip to France, and indeed that will be happening. So this month, I am so excited to finally be able to return to France. I'm also going to hop across the channel to Britain, and I will be sharing detailed videos with my top tier members. So while I will share some pics and I will share some glimpses on my Instagram and in posts on the blog, the extensive videos will be shared with my top tier members. Part of the reason is I genuinely want to hold myself in the present while I'm over there. I really just want to soak it up and not be on my phone sharing and looking at my phone, even though I've done that in the past, but I also know how it pulls you away from being there. So I am going to turn the comments on my IG stories off for the duration of the trip, but you can comment on the IG posts. With all of that said, to see the exclusive videos, which I will be taking, I have some ideas and lists of things I want to capture. I want to bring your attention to something worth taking advantage of if you have ever entertained the idea of becoming a top-tier member of the Simply Luxurious Life. Through this Wednesday, April 6th, the once-a-year opportunity to become a top-tier member, which again allows you ad-free reading throughout the entire blog. It allows you the opportunity to read as many posts each month beyond the 5-month limit if you didn't have the subscription. And you have access to exclusive content. So you have access to the A Cup of Moments. You have access to all the tours of the Simply Luxurious House, My House Le Papillon. And you have the opportunity to enter all the giveaways during French Week and British Week. And you can keep all your favorite posts and podcast episodes in your own personal library by simply clicking add to favorites anytime a post catches your eye. All of these benefits come when you become a top tier member. And through this Wednesday, April 6th, you can save up to 33% off the payment plan you prefer. So monthly, quarterly, or yearly. Your first payment is greatly reduced. And the savings is pretty awesome as you go up the ladder. So you'll pay $5.50 for the monthly, and then it will resume at $7 a month, the second month, and thereafter. The quarterly is the biggest savings. All you pay is $14 for 3 months, and then it goes to the regular price, $18.50. And for the annual, you pay $65 the first year, which is more than 20% savings off of the regular $7 a month cost. So anyway, if you're interested, if you have at all been considering becoming a top tier member, through this Wednesday, April 6th, is the opportunity to take advantage. This only comes around once a year. Otherwise, it stays as it is, and it looks like prices will go up at the end of this year or early 2023. Once you get your regular price, you're locked in. Your price never changes. We have many readers that were locked in at $5 when we started the ad-free program over 4 years ago, 2017. That's 5 years ago. Oh my goodness. And they're still just paying $5 a month, which is the best plan to have. But that price will never come back. So you're locked in with whatever regular price you have. Anyway, be sure to follow me on Instagram, The Simply Luxurious Life, or The Simple Sophisticate Podcast. I'll be sharing a few pics and videos on those feeds and even more detailed videos and posts on the blog and for top tier members as April unwinds and we step into May. I want to take a moment to extend a thank you to Betsy Kahn, who is a listener of this podcast. Thank you, Betsy. Your review is very much appreciated. Let me share it with everyone. She wrote, I ran across Shannon's podcast about a year ago, and now I'm delightedly making my way through the archives. I haven't ever heard her say that she was trained as a broadcaster, but I really appreciate her radio voice, skill delivery, and very pleasant listening. Now that I get how much she is a lifelong learner, I am sure that it is no accident and that she worked hard to train herself in that skill set. Beyond that, I love the mix of philosophy, food, style, and lifestyle, always delivered in an accessible way instead of feeling elite or esoteric. At first, I could not have imagined myself signing on as a top-tier member of her blog, but then I realized that she consistently produces really quality content and that it is worth paying for. Thank you, Shannon. Well, I want to thank you, Betsy, for taking the time to write such a detailed review. It means a lot to the show. I know you've helped out future or potential listeners. And thank you for joining the Simply Luxurious Life community. I hope you continue to enjoy the content, and I'm excited for what is in store as we step closer to British Week in May. French Week is just around the corner in August. And if you too are enjoying the show, whether you write a review or simply rank it, it means so much, and it really does let potential listeners consider as they discover what they'll find when they tune in. All right. Wishing you a wonderful first full week in April. I'll be back with a brand new episode on Monday, April 18th. Bonne journée. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, visit the blog The Simply Luxurious Life with the shortened URL TSLL.co. For more in-depth exploration of how to cultivate your own unique, simply luxurious life, be sure to pick up my first 2 books. Each are available in hardback, paperback, ebook, and at Audible for audio listening. The first is titled Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, and the second, Living the Simply Luxurious Life. And look for a third book to be released in the spring of 2022. Readers can now join the more intimate Simply Luxurious Life international community by becoming members of the blog, which provides ad-free unlimited reading and access to exclusive content such as each month's A Cup of Moments video chat, tours of my home, Le Papillon, the regular monthly post, What Made Me Smile, and Saturday Ponderings, as well as the opportunity to enter all of the giveaways during French and British weeks. To stay caught up on all things Simply Luxurious, the podcast, blog post, and the cooking show, as well as receive exclusive news and an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your new month, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's free monthly newsletter, which arrives on the last day of each month. And there's a weekly newsletter, a favorite of listeners and readers, which is also free and arrives each Friday to keep you caught up on the recent weekly posts on the blog. Enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a cup of morning coffee and stay in the know about all things simply luxurious. Thank you for tuning in today, and look for 2 new episodes of this podcast each month on the 1st and 3rd Monday. To be alerted to new episodes and when they become available, follow on Instagram, the Simple Sophisticate Podcast, and only the news about this show will be shared. Until next time, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée.